What next for the Wagner Group after Yevgeny Prigozhin's reported death? The apparent death in a plane crash of the man who humiliated Putin comes as little surprise to most Russia observers. But can his mercenary group survive without him? In the aftermath of Yevgeny Prigozhin's march on Moscow 2 months ago, CIA Chief William Burns predicted that Russian President Vladimir Putin would take his time exacting his revenge. What we are seeing is a very complicated dance, Burns suggested at the Aspen Security Forum in July. Putin is the ultimate apostle of payback. And while details of exactly what occurred remain murky in the immediate aftermath of the mercenary boss's reported death in a plane crash, what is clear is that Wagner, the mercenary organization that Prigozhin built, has essentially been first quartered and then dramatically decapitated. With Wagner's prominent role in Russia's military operations in Ukraine already heavily curtailed in the aftermath of his march on Moscow, which embarrassed Putin and the Kremlin, it had seemed, if only for a moment, that Prigozhin was trying to claw back some of the influence he had acquired through his operation in Africa at the Kremlin's behest. Prigozhin had put out a statement backing the coup in Niger, seen by some analysts as a reminder of how Wagner had once served the Kremlin's ends. This week he had posted a video from somewhere in Africa, in his trademark combats, suggesting that, perhaps, he had found a new role, and that his actions had been forgiven. In that video, Prigozhin insisted he was recruiting for operations in Africa, while also inviting investors from Russia to put money in the Central African Republic through Russian House, a cultural center in the African country's capital. He was flying over the Tver region near Moscow with other senior Wagner leaders when his private jet fell from the sky over Russia, according to some reports shot down by Russian air defenses. It was not only Prigozhin who perished in the incident. With him on the flight was Dmitry Utkin, one of his closest allies, another key figure in Wagner. A former GRU officer and a mercenary who had been active in Syria guarding oil fields, he had been implicated in organizing the Wagner convoy that tried to drive to Moscow. Reports from Russian social media channels associated with Wagner suggest other members of Wagner's leadership may also have been on the flight. What is clear is that Wagner, as it was once constituted, is no more. In that video, Prigozhin insisted he was recruiting for operations in Africa, while also inviting investors from Russia to put money in the Central African Republic through Russian House, a cultural center in the African country's capital. According to recent reports, hundreds of Wagner fighters who had been exiled to bases in Belarus had begun to leave that country, some dissatisfied with the lower levels of pay in that country, others relocating to work in West Africa. The force there reduced in numbers from over 5,000 by around a quarter. In Russia itself, Wagner's operations had been on something of a hiatus during the past 2 months, as it appeared Prigozhin and his allies looked for a new role in the shadow of Putin's displeasure. And with Wagner out of Ukraine after deploying its fighters as cannon fodder in the battle for Bakhmut, perhaps the biggest question is whether it can continue in any viable form in the African states where it has been active. Although names had been mentioned speculatively as possible replacements for Prigozhin who would meet with Kremlin approval, whether any of them will be capable of filling his shoes is far from certain. Much of Wagner's African empire, combining disinformation operations, murky commercial interests and mercenary work, relied on the unscrupulous connections that Prigozhin and his close associates had forged over the years. There were suggestions, for example, that Wagner came to the aid of the military junta in Mali, a move that contributed to France's decision to end an almost decade-long military operation there. Thank you for joining us from Bangladesh. More than a year since it broke out, the conflict in Ukraine has changed the world, and The Guardian has covered every minute of it. Our reporters on the ground have endured personal risk to produce more than 5,000 articles, films, and podcasts. Our live blog has been expertly updated continuously and comprehensively since the outbreak of Europe's biggest war since 1945. We know it's crucial that we stay until the end and beyond. There is no substitute for being there, as we did during the 1917 Russian Revolution, the Ukrainian famine of the 1930s, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the First Russo-Ukrainian conflict in 2014. We have an illustrious, 200-year history of reporting throughout Europe in times of upheaval, peace and everything in between. Thank you for watching my video. Next video coming soon.